I'm just going to be talking about some of the ways that you can optimize the costs of some of your Azure resources, because as lots of people know, these are really, really powerful tools. But with any powerful tool, there's definitely a cost that comes in behind those. So what I've done here is I've just built a resource group today. It's got a Azure Synapse, formerly known as Data Warehouse, a data factory in order to call some stuff, and the SQL Server just to house the actual Synapse on there. So in case anybody's not familiar, there's a very, very powerful tool that is linked to what Vincent was just talking about there, called Azure Monitor. So if you go into your little hamburger menu there, you can go down here to Monitor, and you can see tons and tons of it functionality in here. We're going to be looking at some of these visualizing metrics. You can query logs, you can set alerts. There's lots and lots of really, really valuable things in here. So I've already got that set up to where I want them to. So this is just the monitor the monitor results from today on my my Synapse database. So you can see here I've added two different metrics, one of them being the DWU limit, and one being the DWUs, the amounts that are actually used. Now, why did I get these? Number one thing, whenever you're doing any sort of cost optimization or cost analysis, is figure out where your cost is actually coming from. So I've gone in here. This is just on the Azure pricing on Azure Synapse Analytics. I've gone over to their pricing calculator, and I'm looking at the one piece that I'm actually using in here. So this is just Azure Synapse SQL. If you look here, the big thing is it's based off of what the service level is and how long it's actually up for. There's a couple of other things regarding how much data is on there, but for the most part, these are the two largest contributing factors to at least Azure Synapse costs. If we go to something like Data Factory or Databricks or Streaming Analytics, they've all got their own costing models. So the most important thing is to find out what those actual costing model is behind the resources that you're using. So in this case, the service level and the amount that is actually being charged at that service level. So it's asking me for what DWUs are. This stands for data warehousing unit. It's kind of an amalgamation of CPU, memory, I/O, just anything that you'd use on a SQL server. It's kind of an amalgamation of those three metrics. Anyways, back to my monitor there. So now I know what is actually contributing to my costs. I can actually set up a chart to do some analytics on. And you can see the actual amount that I've used in here is very, very little. That's because all I was doing on here was starting and stopping it. So don't worry that I'm not actually using it very much. This same use case scenario applies to anything that you'd be using out there that you'd have the ability to do this type of operation on. The big one that I'm going to do is I want this limit. So the limit defines what am I actually paying for and what am I using. The aggregation that it has on here, so I could use average or max. I usually set it up so that on the limit, I use the max because it actually defines what the service level was at that point in time. And then on my used, I usually define it at the average amount. Reason is because I don't usually pull this out by, undo that zoom. I don't usually pull this out by the minute. I usually aggregate it up to either a 5 or a 15-minute level. So the way you set your time periods on here is just up here on the top right-hand corner there. You can see I've got local time, last 12 hours for 1 minute. I'll click on that, And I'm going to define it for last 30 days, and I'd probably aggregate it to either the 5 or the 15 minute. I'm going to say 15 minute right now. When you do that, it usually you don't get a ton of very useful data in or useful chart in here, but what I find is if you do, say, 30 days or so, you can actually get a better sense of periodicity within your users. So if you have batch jobs that are running on your Synapse data warehouse, you can see when are these running, how long are they running for, how much is being used, and you're able to pull that out kind of on a number of days. If you put this down to, say, the 5-minute mark, you're going to get a warning here saying that you've got too much data requested, and that you're not going to really be able to interact with that chart all that great. Personally, I still execute it, even though the chart isn't all that that useful to me. Reason being is because you can actually do a slightly more analysis on here. If you go up to share, you can actually download this as an Excel workbook. Yeah, I'll allow this to pull that out for me. I'm going to put this in Metrics 1 because I've already downloaded this, make sure I could do this properly. And we'll open this up here. Bear with me while I'm just opening that. All right. So you can see that dumps out a ton of rows for me. I've got just under 9,000 rows in there to see how much is actually being used. What I tend to do is this breaks it up into a couple of rows here. So I'm just going to turn this into a table. Okay. All right, I'm just going to mute the one participant there. It's okay. Sorry. So what I have to do is go in here. I tend to replace any of these double dashes there with zeros, and it'll make sense why in just a moment here. Let's get rid of this 100 and 200, and then everything else. I'm going to change it to zeros, and we'll get rid of it back, everything from there. The reason is because now I could actually use these values and sum them up and see what's actually useful in there. Okay. So what's really nice about at least the Azure Synapse pricing model here. So if I go back to my pricing, you'll see that these are actually, it's 1.03 for 100 level DTU or DWU, sorry. If you go up to, say, 1,000, it's 17.024. If I go up to 10,000, it's 170.024. This actually scales completely linearly. So per DWU, it is 1.7024 cents per hour. But that's per DWU, so you have 100. So the way I go about figuring out how much everything is going to cost for me is, and I'm just going to copy and paste a bunch of stuff that I've already written. If I figure out what my interval is, in this case, it's I got to fit. This is a 5-minute interval, and all I do here is figure out what the interval or the price per interval ends up being. So if I look at price per interval, I end up getting, this is equal to what? I think that divided by 60 multiplied by whatever that is. Okay. So now that I've got an actual price per interval, so this cost me, you know, 1/10 of a cent per 5 minutes that this is running per DWU. need to figure out how many DWUs am I using and what does that end up looking like. On the table, you can just end up providing a total row here, so you can figure out what that ends up being. But for my case, I'm just going to show what the cost is, which ends up just being the sum of my table there by the actual limit, because you're charged by the actual limit. So what you actually use in there, and you're multiply that by that amount. So I can see that this thing cost me a little under $9 for it to be up to date. The example that I have is I was doing analysis like this over the summer, and we had somebody that they were running their system really well. They had a really performant batch load on a daily basis, but they were running every day, so 365 days. They did have their system up for 24 hours a day. And they were running I believe it was the 1500 DWU level. So this was costing them $25 an hour. So if I have that $25 an hour, that was 360. This environment was costing $223,000 a year. Conversely, by doing this type of analysis, it was actually really easy to see that while they never really hit that 1500 limit, they only maxed out at, I think it was just over 1,000, but some of their queries could just be spread over a longer period of time. So we were able to reduce their cost level to the 1,000 level, which was $17 an hour, and we found they were only using it for 4 hours a day because they had a couple of different loads. So if I do 365 times 4 hours a day times, what was that, 1724? Only should have cost them $24,000 on a yearly basis. So basically, by doing this analysis, we were able to reduce their cost by 90% on this piece of infrastructure. So doing this type of analysis ends up being really, really important. And anybody that is implementing this type of environment, I highly recommend you go out and at least on a quarterly basis, review your costing. Review what are the high cost items that you have within your environment, and are there ways that you can actually change them? If not, that's perfectly fine. But it's good to go about looking at these things. Each resource group that you build up in Azure does have a cost analysis piece in the cost management part of the resource group. You can also do this at the subscription level and see what are the high. Now, this doesn't have any report because I only had this on, I only built this today, but you can see resource by resource what is actually contributing to your costs. You can also set budgets and start limiting yourself in that way as well. So once you've actually got this kind of thing, how do we go about doing this? So I know there's lots of people out there that have used Azure Automation. I highly, highly recommend doing that. So I'm just going to build an Azure Automation account here and then show you guys how I recommend using it. So I'm just going to create this here. This will be my Azure Auto. Put in here. Put this in Canada. I am going to create a run as account here. What this does is it allows me to provision or manipulate other resources as the account that's running these scripts that I'm going to do. I'm going to show you a couple of PowerShell scripts, and that PowerShell needs an account to actually run these things as. So I'll create that. It'll just take a moment to actually run. All right. So these don't take very long to, this was my completed. Shouldn't take very long to actually deploy there. There we go. Two things that you're going to need for this is you need to make sure that you have some modules. These are PowerShell modules that are used by the scripts that we're going to play with. So the two that I'm going to be needing today is AZ accounts. So I'll go in there, import these modules. Sorry if I'm going fast, but I know we're short on a little bit of time there. While that one's importing, I'll go back and grab the other one, and that's just AZ SQL. This just allows me to manipulate some SQL. It needs to have accounts in there, so give it 2 seconds to while accounts finishes. Okay, AZ accounts was finished. Import that. While that is running there. Yeah, it's still important that while that's running, I'm just going to quickly set up the my Runbook. There's tons of different types of Runbooks that you can build out there. Graphical Runbooks, you can build Python Runbooks. The one I'm most familiar with and that I use the most often ends up being these PowerShell Runbooks. They're very simple to use, and it allows me to actually manipulate a lot of different resources. Anything you can run in PowerShell, you can pretty much run up on Azure Automation here. So we're going to call this my update Synapse, and it's going to be a PowerShell runbook there. So while that's creating, let me see if I can go and change or update my other module there. Okay, AZ accounts is available now, so now I can go get AZ SQL. All right. Well, that's going. Now we'll actually go about and play around with our accounts here. Now, I know when I said that when we had our when we built this automation account, it actually provisioned my run as user as well. So if I go into access control and look at role assignments here, I'm going to see that I've got this Cal Azure Auto that's a contributor. One thing to note is that just because I built this inside of this one resource group, it actually gets put into the subscription as a contributor. So you may or may not want that type of thing. So personally, I'm a bigger fan of go to the subscription, go to the access control there, go to role assignments. We'll see that it's in there. I'm going to remove this role assignment from the subscription level. I'm just going to put it back at my the actual analysis resource group level. So I'm going to go in here. We'll put it there. Let's add a role assignment. We're going to make it a contributor. And what would I call that? Cal Azure something right there. So while this is going, this allows that automation account just to play around with this resource group and manipulate things that are in this resource group. You know, lots of people recommend other things. This is just the one that I like to play with. So going back to this Runbook here, thing you have to do is you need to make sure you edit this. I'm going to quickly put in the one PowerShell script I've got here. All I'm doing is I've got a couple of variables. This is my resource group. This is the warehouse server. This is the Synapse database. And all I'm doing here is suspending it. So I'm going to save that and we'll publish it. I'm not going to test it right now. But what we end up doing is now that I've actually got this, I can use this Runbook to turn on and off my Synapse server. So this is paused right now. I'm going to resume that. And while that's resuming, I'm going to go to a really, really common use case that I have found with Synapse, and that's it ends up getting loaded with a data factory. So I've got a data factory here. I've got my automation example in there. I've built out a couple of variables in one pipeline. Like I said, I'm not going to go into the complexities of building those out. That's not what the point of this is. What we're trying to do is show you guys how I would recommend automating this out, because lots of organizations end up using Data Factory to load Synapse. And in order to do this in a cost-effective way, we should turn on and off and scale up and down that Synapse server before and after each use. So what I could do is build a web. Let's make this slightly smaller there. So here's a web call. I could have it so that I just call this this Runbook. The way you end up doing that is, let's go back to the Runbook itself, is you need to create a webhook for it. So all a webhook is an endpoint that you can call externally. The one thing about these endpoints is anybody who has the webhook is able to call it. So I would recommend having either some way within the webhook itself of identifying who's actually calling, or making sure that you limit these to a very specific use case. So I'm just going to call these, my update Synapse SYN. Perfect. And this is the URL. What that URL is, I'm not going to actually show out there, because I'm just going to put it into the settings. The way you call them is you just do a post against that URL, and I'm going to do it with an empty JSON string. And that should really be it. As soon as I did turn on my Synapse server, and as soon as I run this, I should be able to turn off that Synapse server by just calling that Runbook. So let's run that. Deploys this into my, all right. It ends up failing there. That's okay. Not found. Okay. Oh, it's because I haven't actually done anything with this yet. I have to provision that. I don't have any parameters in that that Runbook right now. I'm going to create that. Okay, now I've got an actual Runbook. Okay, we'll rerun that. Now it's queued up. And it succeeded. Now you notice that succeeded very, very quickly. It took 3 seconds or so there. And if I look at my my Synapse here, I can refresh this, and I can see it is running at this point. The output is going to have that it's an error right now, and the reason is because that webhook there, that Powershell script has no credentials associated to it. The reason that we built that run as account is we do need to use it in our Powershell script. So let's go and update that Powershell script to actually play around with it. But before I do that, I want to show you the other piece that's important, is that we've got an input to our Runbook here. Now, it's got a number of different things. Most importantly is, well, there's not a ton that's really important in this one. What happens here, and the reason that this succeeded, even though my my Runbook failed, is that a webhook is basically set it and forget it. So all I'm doing here is actually running that the API, or I'm just starting the Runbook and forgetting it and moving on. The way that I recommend doing this, and that I highly, highly recommend you do it, is by using the webhooks that are down here. So if I go in here and I start making a webhook, I'll start by playing with this. I'll copy that URL over, and we'll do an empty JSON body for now. What will end up happening is this is going to have what's called a callback URI. And I would have to do a post against that callback in order to make sure that the data factory can start and move on again. So if I were to call this, it would wait until whatever operation is done in there, and then it would actually move on. So let's just go in here. I'm going to edit this, and thought I might have a little more time, but it looks like I don't. So the way you parse out that webhook is first you make sure that I'm just going to tell this runbook that I have a parameter to use. So a couple of things in there. The way you end up parsing out that is if that webhook data exists, we set the parameters to whatever that webhook data request body is. And if it has a piece in there called the callback URI, I put it into a variable called callback URI. This allows me to call back once this suspend is actually done. The other part that we had in there is this when we created the automation account, it created this run as connection. So it's important to start using those connections as well. It grabs our automation account, and all I would do here is, I'm just going to copy my script in a moment. So I can put change the automation connection to whatever that connection property was, and then I would actually use another commandlet to connect. This is just your basic connect to AZ account. It allows you to connect to Azure, use as that application ID in the subscription and the tenant using a thumbprint on there. Very secure way to connect. And then lastly, if this all goes through and we want to actually play around with that callback URI, we'll need to actually make sure that you use it properly. So all it is here is if it gets past this and I'm able to move on, I get the callback URI, I set a status code to 200, and I invoke a web request to that callback URI using the JSON body. So this will actually suspend the Synapse database, call back, and allow Data Factory to move on. Now, lastly, because I wanted to make it so that this PowerShell Runbook was a little more versatile than just suspending, I wanted to make sure that I could do three things in there. One being suspending, resuming, and thirdly, scaling. So either scaling up or down. Yeah, wrote something a little more complex. Not too much, but all we've got here is we've got a resume operation, we've got a suspend operation, and a scale operation. And lastly, we can actually parse out more parameters out of that body that is passed in there. We just need to set these in Data Factory. So the way you do that is by actually going into the webhook here, going into the body, dynamic. Now, I'm not sure if anybody out there has actually used the Data Factory dynamic content language. It can get a little bit complex here, so I'm just going to post this. All this is going to be ends up being recorded. I have a caller so that this can report what is actually calling that webhook. It gets recorded as the data factory, the pipeline, and the run ID. I pass those 3 variables that I'd set up. So it's the resource group name, the warehouse name, and the server. I wrote in an operation there, so resume, suspend, or scale. And I set these service objectives. So if I need to scale up or down, I just change this service objective to say scale. And then this could be, scale it up to 10,000, scale it up to 1,000. In this case, I'll just leave the 100 as the standard there. And that's all recorded. So if anybody wants these scripts for afterwards, just reach out to me and I'll post them somewhere. I'll send them out to whoever needs them. But let's just save this and publish this. Okay, so while that's just publishing, I'm just going to double check my Synapse. Okay, so this is online right now. And you'll see here, this operation is going to scale it to 100. I'm just going to change that to, instead of scaling it, we're going to suspend it. Suspend. We'll hit finish on there. And let's debug this. So if everything goes right, okay, so this is in progress. Let's go back to Synapse. It doesn't say anything on there at the moment. We'll go to my update Synapse. You'll see we've got a running operation in there. You'll see that we've got the webhook data. If I look at that, you can see that we've got the resource group name, the data warehouse server. We've got the operation that wants to happen. And we've also got the callback URI, importantly. So that will actually allow us to call back to the service that called it, make sure that it can move on. So lastly, I'll just go back to my Synapse, and you'll see that this says that it is in the middle of pausing right now. So like I said, I just wanted to quickly show you guys how to automate the turning on and off and scaling some of these resources, and how I go about doing the analysis of figuring out when they need to be reach those various objectives.